From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up, K-State's Casey Olson returns to talk about smoke management from the pasture burning season in Kansas this year. He says that the collaborative efforts of pasture managers, livestock organizations, and state agencies have paid off in minimizing air quality issues, a trend that Casey expects will continue. Then from the College of Agriculture at K-State, Susan Metzger joins Britton Rucker to look ahead to a major international conference taking place on the K-State campus this September, the United Nations Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock annual meeting. And K-State's Charlie Lee will look this week at the reasons behind a surprising number of fish kills in our farm ponds this year. Here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today. The prescribed pasture burning season in Kansas is over with for this spring. And so we're going to, on this segment, take a step back and make some observations on how that went, keying on the smoke management and mitigation aspect of prescribed burning. Along with us once again is Casey Olson from the Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State. He is a range cattle management scientist with the university. Let's go back, though, Casey, a bit to some of the issues that had emerged in recent years regarding the behavior of smoke from prescribed fires in Kansas.
Sure enough, and maybe I'll go a little bit deeper into the background. We all know that if we lose the ability to manage at the landscape scale here in the Flint Hills, we will probably lose the Flint Hills, the largest remnant of tall grass prairie on planet Earth and repository of untold wealth in terms of biodiversity. In recent years, we've had some problems with our smoke traveling to downwind municipalities and things like that, where we have caused air quality exceedances in terms of ozone concentration and in terms of fine particulate matter in the air. The Environmental Protection Agency, whenever there is an exceedance of either one of those parameters, is lawfully entitled to fine licensed polluters in those municipalities, so that's a problem. But people and human health are probably a greater concern. Folks that have certain respiratory conditions, when they are particularly exposed to fine particulate matter in the air, they can have respiratory crises that result in hospitalization.
Mm-hmm. And that was the tone, actually, a few years ago when certain tangible steps were taken to address this situation, were they not?
Yes. The last, I would call it a big burn year, okay, when a lot of acres were treated with prescribed fire was 2017. We caused 3 particulate matter exceedances with Flint Hill smoke during the month of April, 2 of which were in Lincoln, Nebraska. The mayor of Lincoln at the time wrote a strongly worded letter to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment saying you need to do a better job managing smoke. And bless their hearts, the folks at Kansas Department of Health and Environment, they don't dictate when fires happen, but certainly they are the ones that fall on the sword for all of us when complaints come in, and they're the ones that are tasked with modeling where our smoke winds up and under what conditions atmospheric conditions that is, when smoke might become a particular problem. In 2 years' time, we didn't have much of a fire season last year because of drought. But in 2 years' time, we have made remarkable progress. And I don't want this to sound like I'm taking credit for any of it because I can't. This is a success story, I think, for all Kansans to enjoy.
And that's what we want to outline today, what has happened in the last couple of years that have led to this year being a low-incident year in as far as smoke from the prescribed fires that we saw in Kansas and the exceedances in the air quality standards. The implementation of the smoke management plan has apparently hit its stride. Casey?
That's how I see it in as many words. There's a lot of moving parts in this smoke management plan. There is Kansas Department of Health and Environment that monitors smoke and monitors where it goes. There's a lot of complicated math involved, in my understanding, in modeling how smoke disperses and under what conditions it might end up settling over a population center, far downwind. The folks here at Kansas State University that are involved with kansasfire.org, they've been the ones that have been just educating people about their responsibilities as landowners and fire managers in this problem. They've done a fantastic job. The Kansas Livestock Association, getting the word out, talking to people about the risks that we run if we don't change our behavior. I felt it was very interesting earlier this month when the first fire report came out from KDHE. Something like 1.6 million acres of tall grass rangeland on the Flint Hills was actually burned before the conventional fire season. That would not have been part of anybody's thought process 2 years ago.
That was in March now, largely, is what you're talking about.
That would have been the bulk of that 1.6 million acres would have been burned sometime during the last half of March, before it's typically a concern as a source of smoke concentration. Other folks that I think deserve a lot of credit would be Carol Bloxham here at Kansas State University, the Tallgrass Legacy Alliance, that's a consortium of producers, landowners, agency people from around the Flint Hills, just getting the word out. I can say today that I'm tremendously proud to be associated with these folks, because a problem that was at least under threat of being legislated away was solved by consensus, was solved at the grassroots level. I think moving forward, the success that we've had this year is going to feed upon itself. We've done a great thing here as a bunch of Kansas landowners, and the sky's the limit in terms of improvement. Science is showing us that prescribed fire can be conducted for many other purposes and during many other times of the year than just in April for improving yearling cattle performance. And we're just at the cusp, really, of learning about the other utilities of prescribed fire. We can control noxious weeds, for example, with fire. We can improve wildlife habitat with fire. We just need to move it around over the calendar year a little bit to get some additional positive benefits.
I want to ask you about one tactic that you've had experience with, and that is patch burning only a portion of one's particular pasture or set of pastures in a given year, leaving the others unburned, and then basically rotating those burns year after year. Has that contributed to any extent here?
Not that I'm aware, because the biomass accumulation on an unburned pasture tends to be additive year upon year. I think the quality of the smoke that is emitted from a patch burn grazing system is similar to a regime that would be annually burned. Some of your listeners may take issue with that, but that's the data, at least, that I'm aware of. As much as anything, because we are, as of the end of April, maybe the first several days of May, we burned 2.6 million acres out of a 4 million acre remnant. That would be a strong fire year. In 2017, when we had all the problems, actually 600,000 less acres burned in that year. So we got more acres treated with fire, which I think is a positive thing for the resiliency of the tallgrass prairie, and we have less air quality problems. People are learning to interpret things like wind direction, wind speed, mixing height, so they can be more cognizant of where that smoke is going to travel. Our one and only particulate matter exceedance this year was actually in an Oklahoma county where a lot of prescribed fire is practiced. We're not perfect yet by any means, but we're slowly figuring out how to direct those plumes of smoke away from urban centers. And, the other thing I'd point out that's quite remarkable is that there weren't very many good burning days in the month of April in 2019. The wind conditions were awful much of the time, and it was awfully wet. So, in spite of the fact that we had some environmental limitations we were still able to direct those good burning days in a way where we could be good neighbors.
And we don't want to overlook a highly important cog in this, the mechanical tool that was developed in the wake of issues a few years back, the smoke management tool that's online at ksfire.org. Apparently, more and more landowners are employing that and making decisions based on the predictive abilities of that tool, and as far as smoke output.
That's a fact. I mean, everybody that I talk to that's a prescribed burner relies heavily on that website, and it's what I'd call a one-stop shop for prescribed burning. Almost anywhere in Kansas, you can get an hour-by-hour weather report that can include comments on fire danger, includes an estimate of mixing height, which is roughly an estimate of how far your smoke is going to travel into the atmosphere before it disperses. And in general, the higher the number, the better. But learning some of those weather nuances and being able to look at a map that day by day predicts the direction that your smoke plume is going to travel is way more information than we had even 5 years ago. And particularly over the last 2 years, there's been enough publicity, enough education where I think it is a bookmarked website on the computer of every manager of prescribed fire in this state.
But again, your parting message to pasture managers, Casey, is to not fall into a sense of complacency looking forward. Keep up the progress in managing fires, managing the smoke from those fires, and being willing to go outside the box, so to say, in the future.
Yes, sir. And, as much as anything, I wanted to do this radio spot today to give everybody a pat on the back. I mean, we hear about it loud and clear when we mess up. We don't hear about it as often when we do the right thing, when we succeed. With the progress we've made over the last 2 years, I am extremely hopeful that we're going to make even more in 2. We're going to maybe cease to have this as a problem, listed in our top 5 problems that we have to deal with in the next decade.
That's an admirable goal. And thanks for the input on this, Casey. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric, for having me.
Range cattle management scientist out of Kansas State University, Casey Olson. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back with more on the K-State Radio Network. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Invitations are being sent around the world for high-profile leaders to travel to K-State in September to help shape the future of livestock production. Livestock producers worldwide are facing complex questions about innovating in sustainable ways to meet growing global demand. Those questions deal with feeding nearly 10 billion people in the coming decades, environmental stewardship, business concerns, dependable systems for grain and feed, disease prevention, technology adaptation, and more. Discussing this further is Senior Administrator for the K-State College of Agriculture and K-State Research and Extension, Susan Metzger. Susan, explain the purpose for the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock meeting.
I'd be glad to. So the purpose of the meeting, it's a multi-stakeholder meeting, and the idea is to bring in individuals truly from around the globe with a mutual interest in sustainable livestock systems to talk about mutual challenges and really to identify innovations to address those challenges and to think about the ways that the things that we might be doing well here could be translated well to other areas of the world.
Now, what is the history behind this event?
Sure. So this is the 9th annual multi-stakeholder meeting of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. But exciting to us, it's the first time that it's going to be held in the United States. Previously, it's been held in places like Mongolia and Ethiopia. So it's exciting to have it here in the U.S., and it's also the first time that it's being hosted by a university, which really provides us an opportunity to really show research, factual-based approaches to sustainable livestock systems.
Now, as you mentioned before, this is the first time in the U.S. they're hosting. Why did they choose Kansas State University?
So it was a competitive bid. Once they made the decision that they wanted to come to the United States, they put out a bid for any university that might be interested in hosting the event, and really, for that matter, any organization or entity that wanted to host it. So K-State submitted a proposal last fall and was selected amongst several other universities as the shortlist bid. And we were excited to be notified last October that we were the entity that they selected to host.
Now, this meeting is titled Innovation in Sustainable Livestock Systems, which will take place in Manhattan September 9th through the 13th. Susan, what will be discussed and or focused on in this sector?
Absolutely. So the theme of the conference is Innovations for Sustainable Livestock Systems, and that means more than just innovations, what we might think of technology. It also extends to innovative practices, policy changes, and approaches to sustainable livestock systems.
Susan, being that this is a global conference, how many attendees are you planning on having coming to K-State?
Sure. So in the past, depending on the host country, I think they've had anywhere from maybe 200 to 300 individuals, and I think we will exceed that. So we're going to have this at Forum Hall at the K-State Union, which gives us ample room for capacity, especially for our plenary sessions. So we hope to attract more than 400 people.
And Susan, you're not only planning on locals being there, you're planning on some pretty influential individuals. Who will be speaking there?
Certainly. So of those attendees already, registration opened up a few weeks ago. So when you look at the registration list, it is truly all across the globe. Registrants from Rome and South America, Ethiopia, all over the world, already making plans to come to Manhattan. What we're really excited about is that our speaker lineup reflects that global perspective too. So we'll have livestock producers that are close to home to us, such as Scott Foote from Hoxie Feeders here in Kansas, as well as Tom Jones, who with High Plains Feed Yards here in Kansas. But then also we have speakers coming from around the globe too, from the World Bank and Rabobank, and truly global speakers.
Diving a little bit deeper into the speakers at the event, who are some of the key speakers that will be presenting topics at this conference?
So it's really hard to just pinpoint one or two, because right now we probably have in the neighborhood of 40 confirmed speakers throughout the event. Some names that might be really exciting for individuals is Tom Vilsack will be coming to attend the panel on trade. And many will know Tom as being a former Secretary of Agriculture and now stays engaged, especially in the dairy industry. So very excited to have him here. Bruce Feinberg is the Senior Director of Global Quality Systems for McDonald's. Many of our livestock producers are really beginning to engage with that consumer end, and McDonald's has been really on the forefront of learning what consumer demands is and then communicating and partnering that with livestock producers to meet those types of demands. Internationally, some exciting names that may be new to some of our listeners and attendees. Jal Campari is with the World Wildlife Fund, their international programs. And Robin Ganzert is with American Humane, which is different than the Humane Society. She's a veterinarian with that and really looks at animal welfare across the globe. We have individuals from dairies in North Africa, and you'll probably see a common theme throughout. Many of our speakers do represent the dairy industry. Dairy Farmers of America has been a significant sponsor and help in planning this event, and has really helped expand our network to look around the world of sort of the diversity of dairy producers that we have. So you'll see many of those individuals here as well. And we are working right now with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who's interested in partnering on this event too, who will be bringing likely many of their high-end leaders, administrators in their organization as well.
Now, run us through the schedule for this conference.
Absolutely. So, of most appeal to, I think, the general audience will be the first 3 days of the event. So, Monday will be 4 plenary sessions on the topics of food and nutrition security, livelihood and economic growth, animal health and welfare, and climate and natural resource use. And so we have a variety of speakers that will help us kind of unpack those four challenges related to livestock systems. On the second day is more of a policy approach. And so we'll have two panel sessions. One panel will be really talking about innovation itself. What are the different approaches and innovations that we've seen around the world tackling livestock systems? Mm-hmm. And then the second panel on Tuesday will be related specific to trade. So we'll have a number of importers and major exporters really talking about the challenges with livestock systems related to trade. And then Wednesday is just tours. So we'll have 5 tour options that will take them probably within most places about a 45-minute drive of Manhattan. We will have one tour bus that will take a group of individuals to the Kansas State Fair. Many of our global visitors may not have ever experienced something like the Kansas State Fair. So what a great experience. And then other tours will take them to areas where they can really see some of those major topics in action, such as antimicrobial resistance, animal health and welfare, and even our full production systems. So taking them to places like Alma Cheese and even a local dairy so they can see, from the animal to the plate, what that actually looks like.
And I'm sure there's a contrast from here to where they're from.
Absolutely. So typical of the global agenda for Sustainable Livestock's previous meetings, if they've really been in areas where you might have small shareholders, kind of subsistence shareholders, and really dispersed grazing systems. Mm-hmm. And so this will be the first time that probably many of our visitors have seen large-scale animal production and across species too. So it's really a fun opportunity to show them large contained animal feeding operations, as well as the diversity of, especially livestock, we have even close to Manhattan.
Now, you mentioned innovations as a big part of this conference. Why is sharing innovations from on-the-farm practices to genetics and technology important?
Well, I think the most important thing is scalability and moving this across the globe. So I would say that nowhere else in the world than Kansas have we been able to really explore some of these innovations from disease traceability and some of the genetics that you mentioned. But there is a challenge of transferring and scaling that type of innovation to the type of industries I talked about. Like, what do you do with those types of innovations for a small shareholder that might live in Ethiopia? And so the opportunity for this meeting is to not only talk about the innovations that we see here, but then how can you move those innovations around the globe in an effective way?
Now, how can people get involved with this conference?
So there are 2 great opportunities right now. So we have a call on our website for both parallel programs. So those are typical kind of breakout sessions, 25-minute presentations on a variety of topics that match those items I mentioned in our agenda. And then also a call for proposals, which is an excellent opportunity for students to share their research and their practices they've had so far. I just really encourage everybody to attend this event, even if you only have the opportunity to show up on Monday or Tuesday and sit in on a session or 2 and engage with our visitors. This is a really unique opportunity to spend time with livestock producers from around the world.
Well, Susan, this conference sounds like it's going to be an amazing experience and lots of take-home messages. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
That was Susan Metzger, Senior Executive Administrator for the K-State College of Agriculture. Again, the conference is held at K-State September 9th through the 13th. You can register at conferences.ksu.edu/GASL 2019. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker, and we'll return with more after this short break over the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. And now today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. And we'll start with this week's Crop Progress and Condition Report for the state of Kansas from the USDA. For the week ending this past Sunday, our topsoil moisture supplies were at 36% surplus, 62% adequate, and only 2% short to very short, to no one's surprise. Subsoil moisture supplies, 28% surplus and 70% adequate. Again, only 2% short to very short. The condition of the Kansas winter wheat crop this week, much the same, 56% good to excellent, 33% fair, 11% called poor to very poor. Winter wheat now jointing at 89% around the state, and wheat headed at 35%. That's still well behind the 64% for the 5-year average. Corn planting in Kansas, 46% done, well behind the 67% average. And emerged corn, 26%. That's behind the 38% average for the day. Soybean planting, 7% complete now, behind the 16% average. Grain sorghum planted at 1% on average. And cotton planted at 5%. That's equal to the average. Sunflowers planted at 1%, again equal to the average. And range and pasture conditions around the state this week are 72% good to excellent, 24% fair, 4% poor to very poor, according to the USDA. As for the national crop progress and condition numbers, we turn to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Wet conditions across the Midwest were not conducive for planting.
Looking at corn, only 30% of the crop planted by the 12th of May. That is an increase of just 7 points from last week and significantly behind the 5-year average of 66% and last year's 59%.
That was USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey, who noted significant delays in 5 Corn Belt states:
Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Ohio, and South Dakota.
He says corn emergence also is significantly behind the average pace.
Not much of a better picture, in fact, maybe a little worse with soybeans, with just 9% of the intended acreage planted by May 12th. 5-year average is 29%. Last year, we were at 32% planted on May 12th.
There were soy planting delays in both the Midwest and the Delta states. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative has released the list of Chinese goods that the U.S. intends to hit with 25% tariffs. That's a list worth about $300 billion and would essentially cover all imports to the U.S. from China. There will be a public hearing on the proposed list on June the 17th. That's also the public comment deadline. As for the effective date of these new tariffs, that remains unclear. Indications are, though, they could come into play by late June or perhaps beyond. And a jury dealt Bayer AG a third court defeat, awarding $2.05 billion to a California couple who blamed the company's Roundup herbicide for causing their cancer. This verdict by the North California jury. Bayer has appealed a $78 million verdict reached in August. That was the first Roundup case to go to trial. It said it would appeal the second. That was a more than $80 million jury award decided in March. The jury in this third case found Bayer liable for the non-Hodgkin lymphoma diagnoses of Alva and Alberta Pilliod, a married couple in their 70s. The trial unfolded much like the earlier two, sparring over scientific studies and the credibility of expert witnesses on the relative importance of that WHO ruling on glyphosate, which is the primary ingredient in Roundup. Bayer pointing out that hundreds of studies have shown the compound to be safe, pointing to regulations like the EPA that have approved the product. The EPA in late April reaffirmed its long-held conclusion that glyphosate was safe when used as directed and does not cause cancer. On we go now to this week's edition of Milk Lines. Standing by with that, Mike Burke. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning what is likely going to be a delayed harvest of some of our winter annuals for forages. As our fields of triticale, rye, and wheat continue to mature, Many of those fields that we were going to harvest for forage probably are going to reach past the boot stage before we are allowed to harvest. With the rain we've received recently and more rain in the forecast, it will likely be several days before we'll be able to get into these fields. It's important for us to note that as these fields continue to mature, we've had fairly warm weather, very adequate moisture, there's going to be a change in the nutrients that are in those plants. As we progress from boot stage to the head stage, our protein content will decrease significantly, generally going from about 14 or 15% down to about 10%. ADF and NDF are both increasing every day that it remains in the field, and as we progress into the head stage, fiber digestibility as well is going down. There is a good side to all of this. The tonnage is going up, and actually fairly significantly, as the crop does mature. However, the digestible feed that's out there, or what the cow can actually get out of it, is going down very rapidly. And again, generally, these changes occur in about 4 to 6 days. So what can you do as a producer? Well, you've already made the decision that you're going to harvest it as a forage crop, and you should probably go ahead and continue to do that. However, you may need to consider how you're going to use it on your dairy farm. One of the things that would be really important to do is grab some samples of the crop as you bring it to the silo and send it into the lab. Some things that you want to test for immediately would be things like crude protein, NDF content, as well as the digestibility of the NDF. So NDFD, we might do it at 30, 120, and 240 hours. We also could do UNDF, or undigestible NDF, and again at the 30, 120, and 240 time points. Another method that we could use to determine fiber digestibility would be TT-NDFD, which takes into account the rate of passage as well as the total digestibility of that fiber. This will give us a pretty good idea as whether or not this is an acceptable crop to feed to lactating cows, at least in any appreciable amount. Many times we can use small amounts of this to extend our forages, and for many producers that's probably the reason they were growing small grain in the first place, was to extend the corn silage crop that they put up last fall. However, the quality of this haylage may not be great enough to feed in large quantities to the lactating dairy cows. However, it is still very acceptable for growing heifers as well as dry cows, and actually makes an excellent feed for them. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider the digestibility of the NDF as they harvest their small grains.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly visit with Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, on another aspect of wildlife management. Charlie, you bring to our attention this week, we'll call them farm pond issues, things that those who manage ponds for fishing purposes would want to know about. And the one thing that's jumped out here recently, you say, fish kills, which has a few pond owners out there perplexed as to why that's happening.
Well, fish kills occur in farm ponds typically because of water quality problems or disease or herbicide or pesticide runoff. But low oxygen is by far the most frequent cause of fish kills in farm ponds. Here within the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've got numerous calls about fish kills. And people are concerned. They think that since it's cool, there's not a lot of algae in the ponds yet, that it cannot be a low oxygen level situation. And yes, we can have low oxygen level situations develop because of pond turnover in the spring or in the fall. Most people are concerned about a pond turning over in the fall, but in the spring, when we have cold rains, we can also get a pond turnover.
And explain what a turnover is.
Well, a turnover, remember, ponds often stratified by water layer. You have the upper layer, which is a warmer temperature, warmer water, and higher oxygen levels. Then you have a kind of the thermocline, that very small, thinner layer in the middle, and then the cold temperature and low oxygen level in the deepest part of the pond. So in the spring, during a cold water runoff event, that surface layer has already been warmed as temperatures start to warm up. So you're having some phytoplankton producing oxygen up there in that surface warm part of the pond. You get the cold rain enters the pond, or when there's sustained high winds, it mixes that cold water runoff that's coming into the pond with the pond water, which now does not have a thermocline established. So you get the entire pond now has a low oxygen level. And the oxygen levels may drop too low for fish to survive. Typically, one of those severe mixing events, like what we have when we get these very cold, heavy rains that completely turn over and fill up many ponds, it's going to kill most of the fish larger than an inch or two in one night. It's not uncommon in these kind of situations to find dead fish on dry land up in the watershed above the pond following that turnover. Those fish simply swim upstream in the incoming rainwater, hoping to find an oxygen level that's satisfactory. The adult larger fish die first, then the intermediate-sized fish follow if the oxygen levels are too low, or if those low oxygen levels continue for very many days. Unfortunately, by the time most people recognize that there is an oxygen problem, it's too late to save your fish. But one symptom of a low oxygen level in a pond is fish at the surface gasping for air, typically at sunrise. At sunrise is the time when the oxygen levels are lowest in a pond because we've spent the preceding 10 to 12 hours in darkness when plants are not able to photosynthesize and produce oxygen in the pond. So if you find that type of situation developing, you might be able to save some fish with emergency aeration. Most people don't have aeration equipment, but lagoon pumps work well to circulate water. You need to blow water up into the air or use transfer pumps, blow it up into the air, try to disperse it in as small a droplet form as possible so that it picks up oxygen from the air and then drops back into the pond. You can run a boat motor around in a pond, but typically I think it works better if you back the outboard motor into the pond and set your motor at about a 45-degree angle, making sure that the intake is under the water level so your motor continues to cool, and rev your outboard motor up to kind of spread a rooster tail of water across the surface of the pond. But any type of technique that you have that can mix water and air is going to help provide an oxygen level that's going to support fish.
But will you have to do this repeatedly if the conditions persist?
Well, typically once that pond is mixed over and you no longer have the two different layers separated by the thermocline, it's not going to have to be done. But remember, in most severe cases, all of the fish are dead anyway, or a great majority of them, so restocking is probably going to be the management plan that must be followed.
So once again, that's a ready explanation for why there may be fish kills, particularly with our heavier rains around Kansas, persistent rains, and the turnover that's been taking place in those ponds, leading to low oxygen levels. Another thing you wanted to bring up briefly here, stocking considerations here, important guidelines if folks are thinking of putting in as a feed fish, if you will, hybrid sunfish. What things do folks need to have in mind here?
Well, keep in mind hybrid sunfish are a cross between male bluegill and female green sunfish, but typically they don't produce enough offspring to yield good bass growth rates. Many people are trying to have it both ways. They want very large bluegill. They want very largemouth bass. That's often not the best solution for a farm pond stocking rate. Always stock hybrids in a combination with a predator fish, because eventually the high percentage of them are males, so they have a very low reproductive potential. So those fish are not producing a lot of forage fish for your bass. When they stock them with bass, most of those hybrids' offspring don't survive because the bass very quickly eat them. Most people want to take some bass out of a pond, but remember, hybrid sunfish management is for the production of big hybrid sunfish. It's not going to produce the best bass growth. Hybrids are grown, they're caught, then they need to be replaced with other hybrids that are stocked in future events.
Very well. Some thoughts for those of you who manage farm ponds for fish resources to take into account this spring. And Charlie, we appreciate the word on this. He's a wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. That's our time for today. Thanks for tuning in. For Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.